Hello there and a very good evening to all of you. Crimes in Sri Lanka have increased drastically. Numbers are on the rise. Parents are at stake. Parents are worried. Children are worried. Can the children speak? Silence is the word wherever we go, and it scares and brings a lot of fear. Numbers of 5,000 have been reported over the past 3 months. What's the correction? Where do we start when it comes to the state laws? Today on Law and Order, we join you with an expert to speak to you on child protection and on child abuse, on a very timely hot topic that has raised awareness amongst Sri Lanka as well as globally as well. Joining us on the show today, we have Attorney at Law Nishan Sydney Premathi-Ratna, the Regional Representative of International Chamber of Commerce, as well as his expertise in commercial and other law matters as well. What's important is that we want to congratulate him for being appointed as the Disciplinary Committee of the Sri Lanka Rugby. Good evening. Great to have you with us, Nishan. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Sharon, for the very pleasant introduction. I'm privileged to be back in Law and Order. It's always been intriguing to speaking on law and legal matters in your program.
Pleasure. Nishan, right at the outset, we mentioned about child protection, child abuse. Gone are the days people used to consider it as you can do or beat your child just to correct them. It's not a big issue. But things have changed now. You can't even say a word that can be abusive. Where does child abuse sort of derive? Where do we start? There are different aspects to look at it.
Yes. So, to start off, what is child abuse? Now, a child can be abused through several ways. It can be through mental or physical torture. It can be through rape, and it can be through labor, in obtaining services of a child to be employed. It can be through several ways of where the child is not allowed to enjoy his childhood, and he is traumatized at the ages which are legally recognized, where a person is deemed to be a minor. So, Sharon, you can remember, I think, when I was schooling, I used to get beaten up, and one day I was beaten up by a teacher when I started bleeding, and I was actually traumatized. Now, I didn't know whether I should go and tell this to my mother. The teacher beat me so badly that it was a male teacher. The female teacher, who was also present, started tearing. Now, I just did a very small, I had said I was going to the toilet and I had gone to take a phone call to inform my mother of cricket practices. So, now whether that sort of a thing is now tolerated, the answer is no, because our laws have been amended. From the Penal Code in 1995 was amended, and thereafter in 2006 there was a further amendment brought wherein any form of abuse of a child, mentally or even physically, is to be prevented and curtailed, and such tantamount to an offence. So, I would say even in the present day, even a teacher raising his voice or trying to intimidate a child could fall within the purviews of child abuse. So, the laws are there. No one can argue that the laws are not sufficient in this country. The United Nations have been, I think, pointing a finger at Sri Lanka to say that we don't have one homogeneous piece of legislature where everything is captured. You have to look at, bits and pieces of all forms of legislature in order to see or find proper protection in respect of every aspect. Maintenance of a child, you need to go and look at the Maintenance Act. Then if it is in respect of employment, there is a Shop and Office Act, or there is an act which prevents or precludes women and children from being employed in labor. In respect of offences against children, you have to go and look at the Penal Code. So, likewise, there are so many pieces of legislature in respect of adoption. You need to go and look at the Adoption Ordinance. So many pieces of legislature. So, whether it ought to be in one uniform piece of legislature so that everyone is very clearly aware. So, as a lawyer, even for me, I need to be able to do my own research to find out where protection and the rights of little children are. But now, to a lay person, obviously that might be a question or a concern, but there is in Sri Lanka the National Child Protection Authority, and there is a hotline which you can easily access and call them and inform of any form of abuse which they can then take on. They don't have the power to obviously investigate and punish, but they can facilitate the investigators or the authorities from taking over, and they can be there to be able to through the entire process comfort you and be a source of counsel. So the laws are there, Sharon. Child protection is there in our country. Whether in Sri Lanka our social setup and culture and the social stigma attached to an infant coming out and saying that his father is hitting him or molesting him or sexually abusing him, and what would turn around from that are matters which possibly preclude these complaints coming out.
Nishan, you brought a very interesting side of people opening up and saying the issue. Now, in your case, even you raised a point saying you were not sure whether to tell this to your mum or not, because at the end of the day, we were in a culture where we want to be independent, we want to be strong. So it's a norm, okay, a teacher hitting us. But in the instance, we hear these cases of 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds being abused. And it's a scary side of a social stigma where security of the family is showing more important. Let's not make aware, let's not tell the gummer what the issue is. Let's hide it and let's do it. Is that the right thing? Or should that child open up and call someone and talk to someone? Is that how it has to work?
So, in Sri Lanka, the family is the nucleus of society. That is how we have been built. In the Western world, after the age of about 15 or 16, the children move out and they want to be independent and they start their own thing. But here, even when we are 30 or 40, we fear our dads, we fear our mums. Whatever they say is God sent. So we do not want to cross paths.
Right.
So in a setup like that, when you get an instance where the drunken father is beating up the child, or there is sexual molestation, how does one open out? Can they open out? How what drives them to open out? They might, a child might feel that in a few years that this might stop.
Correct.
And then why do I need to bring this stigma to my whole family?
Or I might be the reason why my parents are arguing.
Yes. So all of those matters can be running in the mind of the child. But the issue is the actual repercussions of child abuse are not going to be seen immediately. They will be echoing in the child's life throughout his or her life. So that is the issue which needs to be addressed at this initial inception stage when an abuse is happening. So now, yes, you should make a complaint, you should reach out, and the National Child Protection Authority has so many awareness programs. They have their centers all over the country. They have officers placed, regional officers, so it's very easy to reach out. I don't see any problem in reaching out, but it might not be where the actual minor comes out and does that act. It might have to be sometimes a third party.
Correct.
The next door neighbor who feels that there is something suspicious, or it can be even in the context of the school teacher who feels that the child is disturbed and this is something unusual, fears the parents, or does not sleep. It can be where the father comes in the night and unknown to the mother. Even the mother might not be able to believe
that
the
there
complaint.
Is a situation.
Yeah, even if the daughter has to tell this against make an allegation against the father, the mother might not believe it. So how is that going to be tolerated by our culture and our system? Are matters which, but I personally believe that we are changing, we are evolving, we are not tolerating this, and people are coming out. Social media is also working in creating awareness, and the system is changing. So with time, I think as equivalent to a Western world setup, Sri Lanka the setup will work. It's not about having the setup and the setup not working. If there are less complaints, if child labour is promoted and nobody is taking any action, the authorities are bribed, if all of those things are happening, then the setup won't work even if the platform is there. So taking it out and making complaints and punishing these perpetrators is the way to go.
Nisha, now if we take child abuse, it's a vast area like you elaborated. It could be anything. But if I am to request or say, let's take a simple case of a family in the village where the stepfather would probably beat his child, and then there is the mother or somebody who supports it. In an instance like that, how do we support the child when it comes to their protection? Does it involve with the police, or do we have to go against the law for this?
Now, in Sri Lanka, the upper guardian of the child is the court. It's the district court. Until the child reaches the age of 18, the upper guardian is the district court. So any decision of in respect of custody and access and changing the child's social or the child's habitat has to be an act which has to be effected through a court. The court would monitor and act in the best interest of the child. So now in the interest where in an instance where there is an allegation and a complaint effected and such is being investigated, then possibly it is not in the best interest of the child for the child to be kept there.
And the child can be under age of 18?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So then it depends on whether the child has, you know, both the parents, or whether it's a single parent family and it's the single father who is beating the child up. So all of those matters will have to be taken into consideration. The Child Protection Authority can also take steps and, you know, comfort the child, and an appropriate application will have to be made to the court in respect of foster care or whatever other means where the child might have to be moved out from the setup. So those sort of things are possible and can be done, because the child until the child reaches the age of becoming a major cannot, in law, cannot be deemed to be able to act. So there has to be a guardian appointed. So in the instance of even where there is property devolving on a child, then that is when this thing, the institute of the public trustee comes in. So likewise, the court, the upper guardian, the district court will have to make decisions on custody and access, and whether even this father should be permitted at a later date after the father confessing to these offences, and, you know, he is charged and punished and all of that, whether access should be given to visit the child. Those are matters for the court to decide. So the district court is the competent jurisdiction for that.
Now, what do you see as a biggest challenge for child protection?
The biggest challenge I see is actually the traumatized individuals or the children who are going through this, going through harassment or all forms of child abuse, employment, lack of maintenance, lack of education. Even it is also an offence where a child is not given access to education. So those are things sometimes the children don't know. In a village, you might be just told to be helping the father with with farming. So that might be the norm in the village, but the child is deprived of education. So all of those are things, unfortunately, the family or the child might not know. They might, the parents might be thinking that they are actually acting in the interest of the child. So now those sort of situations, how does our system go into those matters and take those matters on and create further awareness to these people in order to these forms of abuse? I say even the ability or the inability for the child to have proper access to education is also something which we should look at in the context of abuse. If the parents are depriving children of proper education, they should be also held liable. So how are all of those things to be addressed? The awareness, and the National Protection Authority, Child Protection Authority is trying its level best to create awareness, to reach out to the members of the general public. And they have, if you go onto their website, you can see they have several videos also set up to, real life drama scenarios created, so that by people watching them, they are able to even understand instances of child abuse which they might have not even thought of. So, those sort of programs, and I think it is the National Child Protection Authority who can do all of this and you know, be able to capture all these complaints and all forms of child abuse and break the social stigma attached with opening out.
You brought a very important point, and I see a lot of NGOs involved in trying to help children when it comes to young education, especially educating them how to live a great life, etc. But when there is a crime, social media just goes crazy. They share this video. It's another form of abuse that people don't understand, but they want to spread the word, saying this happened at this location by this parent, etc. That also creates another interest for the perpetrator to do something else.
Definitely. So, I think social media, if it is not properly regularized, has serious effects. Even media for that matter. Now, I think we all experienced during Corona time or during the height of Corona, there were when a Corona victim was discovered or a patient was discovered, there was the entire media crew going there and filming the house. And then they barge into the house, and one of the family members might be not properly attired. All of those were captured and circulated, and it became hot news. So, media organizations should not be able to broadcast matters merely to satisfy public curiosity. That is very strictly, that should be adhered to. If media organizations are doing that merely to promote public curiosity, there was a rape of a 12-year-old girl, and then there was a search effected and the murderer was caught, and the murderer is so and so. Now, murderer has not even been presented and charged yet even. Now, he has been crucified and he has been victimized by the by media. So, in the same lies in respect of the child also. If the child is shown or part of the child's name or localities published, that can mean that actually inevitably you will get to know who this child is. So, these matters ought to be kept confidential. These matters should not be published so that the world at large, because then when the child goes back to school, she might be subject to bullying. So, all of those matters have to be, this is not a child abuse should not be considered in isolation as trying to curtail a single incident. It is about the entire life and the growth of the child, the child's process of, that is what the Child Protection Authority, the scope of its purview is. It is to, number one, to reduce abuse. Number two, it is to capture instances of abuse. Number three, it is to rehabilitate children who have been abused. All those three aspects are important. So, the third element where rehabilitation is becomes a big issue if we further promulgate this social stigma by publicizing and easily uploading photographs or whatever to social media. Those also should be, I say with rest, that our law should evolve so that those matters are precluded from being circulated.
Nisha, now another area during COVID, like you said, that yes, there was a particular candidate or a school that was highlighted particularly, and then they shut down the entire school. There was a lot of talk. But during COVID time, there was also a lot of cases where reports came that people are filing a case that the husband and wife had a fight. And then there was a number of cases where children were isolated, children had no food, everyone is stuck. Thanks to our system where we were back in our feet, but this kind of depression that was brought through right across the time period is something that cannot be resolved. And I think a lot of children are going through that phase of online study to completely going back to school. Now, if there is a child that is traumatized in a situation like this, what do you suggest we should do in terms of encouraging them to live a better life?
Now, I think presently I was just scrolling on my social media and people were sharing certain capturing a certain paragraph in which was being circulated in how differently abled children should not be ridiculed in schools.
Okay.
And also the fact that they should be also given specific requirements which they need to conduct their day-to-day studying, and to not feel that they are an outcast.
Right.
So seemingly in most of our school setups, that too can be, I personally feel that could also be a form of child abuse, because if you are differently abled but you are competent enough to attend a school, you should be not all the minimum requirements for you to conduct or to carry on your education should be provided. So seemingly because of that not being so, and also certain parents also not wanting their children to associate these children with differently abled features, are also matters which are being discussed. So that is, those sort of things are happening. So I personally would love my child being able to interact and mingle with a person who has a disability. I would never say that you should not, because it can happen to anyone, it can happen to all of us.
Correct.
So that sort of culture is still there in our country. So then, in respect of your specific question, now people after COVID, the children are also changing. They have evolved. They evolved into a cyber-oriented education system.
Right.
Now they are required to come to school. They are compelled to. My 2.5-year-old is required to wear a mask. But now I think later on the respective school decided that that is not practical to have a 2.5-year-old to wear a mask. So certain changes have to be made. So children who are going through difficulty owing to the parents not having the means to provide for them, obviously I think the system can only do a certain degree. So it is about the school also being able to identify those children and cohesively work together and get even the parents who have means to be able to voluntarily contribute. But all of those are also matters, I think, which have their pros and cons. Nobody wants to be the person or the pauper in the school.
Nishan, any final message that you want to give our viewers on today's subject being child protection?
Child protection is a very vast area. There are so many offences. There are offences against children which are set out in the penal code, in other forms of legislature. The law is there in our country. The only, if at all, the only complaint which can be made is that we don't have a homogeneous one set of law which covers all of this. Notwithstanding, child protection happens in our country. There is a system, there is a National Child Protection Authority. Complaints are entertained. Anyone, even a 10-year-old, 5-year-old can call up that number and that will be taken up. That's a 24-hour hotline. Your complaint is entertained and they will immediately act upon it. So to everyone who feels that they might be subject to some form of molestation or abuse, you have to come out. You have to take it upon yourself to break out, to come to at least, or if you can't, if you don't have it in you to call the hotline, at least approach a person who you can trust. Speak to that person. It might not be your father if your father is the culprit. You might have to find that person who you can trust. It might be your school teacher, but it is best to come out and make that initial leap to disclose your issue and let then the system take over. Hiding it does not do any favors to anyone, and you are also ensuring that the perpetrator is going to do this on somebody else, and you are not actually preventing preventing this happening only to you, but you are also giving the perpetrator the opportunity to do it to somebody else. Come out and be open and be bold.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Nishan. Real pleasure having you with us on the show. Nishan Sydney Premitra, attorney at law, speaking on child protection, a very important subject. We certainly hope you'll take the good and insights that we shared on today's show. And until we see you next time on Law and Order, I'm Shira Mascrinia signing off. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.